On the night of March 8th, 2018, in Binghamton, New York, a 22-year-old lady, Haley Anderson, left her two roommates at their shared room and went to see her ex-boyfriend at his house. Unfortunately, she never returned. The next day, her two friends discovered that she had not returned and she was not replying their messages. So they track her location using a Find My Friends app, which was installed on her phone. The app directed them to the house of a man who was familiar to her, so they went inside the house through the window, and shockingly, they found the dead body of Haley Anderson laying on the bed. She had been murdered. Haley was a very ambitious, loving, selfless, and an intelligent student who had dreams of becoming a nurse, but her life was cut short in a brutal way. Who murdered Haley Anderson? Join us as we unravel her story. Haley Elizabeth Anderson was born on May 9, 1995, in Westbury, New York. She was the daughter of Karen Anderson and Gordon Anderson. She was the first child, and she had a younger sister who was known as Madison Anderson. However, later on, her parents separated, and her father, Gordon, moved to Georgia. But despite the breakup, Haley remained close to her father, and she maintained a good relationship with him. Haley performed well in both her elementary and high school education. In fact, while in high school, she also participated in extracurricular activities. She played lacrosse, field hockey, and she also participated in the track games. Haley also enjoyed making music. She had a sense of humor and liked being active. Therefore, she spent most of her time with her numerous friends. On Friday nights, they would go out together, eat pizza, and have fun. Haley Anderson graduated in high school in the summer of 2012, and a few months later, in the fall of 2022, she was accepted into a 5-year program at Decker School of Nursing at Binghamton University. Haley was an outgoing young woman who had open and friendly personality, therefore she could easily win over anyone. At school, she studied very hard, and she was very disciplined. She was really determined to become a nurse. She prepared for her exams, and she also did various internships at clinics and medical offices to gain practical experience. Even during her vacations when she was home with her parents at Long Island, she continued working in clinics to gain experience in nursing. Besides studying nursing at Binghamton University, Haley also began earning some extra money, working several times a week as a waitress at Jasmine Brew and Bakery, a small cafe near campus. Back at the university, she continued doing well in her studies. Apart from her studies, she also still enjoyed making music. She started playing in a band, she went to festivals and enjoyed. Haley was having a lot of fun and enjoying life to the fullest. In early 2016, while still at the university, she met a man named Kevin Ocampo. Kevin was also from Long Island. The two found themselves having a lot in common, and so they got along in no time. They got more closer every day, and their relationship was perfect in the eyes of those who surrounded them. When Karen met Kevin, who was her daughter's boyfriend, she liked him immediately. Both Haley and Kevin had their own plans in their minds, and they were still young, so Haley didn't want to commit herself to a serious long-term relationship because of her studies. So she informed her boyfriend about it, and they decided to separate amicably. However, they still continued seeing each other and trusted each other so much. Unfortunately, in the fall of 2016, Haley, who was now in her 4th year of studies, started seeing another man. His name was Orlando Tercero. Orlando was born in Miami, USA. He had 2 older sisters, but unfortunately, he spent his childhood in Nicaragua. However, later on, he was back in the United States, and he was also studying nursing at the Decker School of Nursing in the University of Birmingham, and he was in the same class with Haley. Orlando was very ambitious and determined about his studies. He was actually also one of the best students at his class. On weekends, like everyone else, Orlando also enjoyed being with friends, sometimes drinking, dancing, and partying. So Orlando and Haley grew closer, and they started talking for the first time at one of the many campus parties. The two started to get along well. Surprisingly, Orlando Tercero and Kevin Ocampo, who was Haley's ex-boyfriend, knew each other, and they were actually friends since they both had a Spanish root. Soon, Kevin noticed that Haley was spending more time with Orlando, and they were getting along very well. But at first, Kevin didn't have any problem with the two being together. Orlando continuously tried to get closer to Haley, but Haley had made it clear to him that she didn't want any serious relationship with any man at the moment. The two continued meeting, but their relationship didn't go beyond friendship because Haley had maintained that she didn't want a serious relationship. However, a few months later, Orlando's behaviors started changing drastically. Orlando started showing up unannounced at their off-campus house to talk to Haley, and it was so difficult to send him away when Haley wasn't ready to see him. He also started driving by Haley and her roommate's house on weekends and during the week to spy on whether Haley was home or whether she had any visitors. So Josephine Artin, who was Haley's roommate and friend, noticed that Orlando was starting to become obsessed with Haley. He was stalking her to find out if she had another man besides him. Even though Orlando and Kevin Ocampo were friends, Orlando was so jealous because he knew that Kevin was also part of Haley's life. Surprisingly, by the end of the summer of 2017, Haley and Kevin Ocampo, who was her ex-boyfriend, got back together. The two even went parties together and shared photos of their beautiful moments on social media. Haley then changed her Facebook status to be in a relationship, and Kevin also did the same. Unfortunately, Orlando discovered that the two were back together, and he was filled with jealousy. Unfortunately, one morning when Haley was about to go to university, she discovered that her car tires had been slashed. So she made a video of the 4 tires which had been slashed and posted it on her Snapchat. Haley informed her boyfriend, Kevin, that someone had slashed her car tires. Kevin was convinced that it was Orlando who had slashed Haley's car tires because he had been behaving strangely towards her, so he went to confront him directly. When he met Orlando, he asked him if he had anything to do with slashing of Haley's car tires, but unfortunately, Orlando denied having anything to do with Haley's car tires. Surprisingly, Orlando turned the situation around, and he claimed that Kevin had actually slashed the car tires and was trying to blame him and defame him in front of Haley. Haley then informed her mother, Karen, who lived in Long Island, and when her mother heard of the incident, she strongly advised her daughter to report the matter to the police. Karen was worried when her daughter told her that her relationship with Orlando was getting strange and he was being invasive with her. Karen was also convinced that Orlando was the one who slashed Haley's car tires. Haley heard about her mother's advice to file a police report, and she went and reported that someone had destroyed her car tires. Unfortunately, she didn't mention Orlando's name to the police. Her mother and friends asked her why she didn't mention Orlando Tercero as her suspect, but she ended up saying that she didn't have proof against him, and her accusations against him might land him in a big problem with the university and the police. He might even get expelled from the school. After the car tires slashing incident, many people in her circle advised her to limit her contact with Orlando and end their friendship. Unfortunately, she didn't listen to them, and she continued seeing and talking to him and treating him normally. They still met occasionally and studied together, even though Kevin didn't approve their friendship. A few months later, that was in March 2018, Haley Anderson, who was 22 years old at that time, was 2 months away from her final exams, and she had prepared very well for them. She was looking forward to work as a nurse at Northwell Medical Center in Long Island, the same medical center where she did her internship. She was very excited that she would be returning home after she had completed her university studies. In the early evening of March 7th, 2018, which was on Wednesday, Haley spent time with her roommates, Josephine and Michelle, in the house they shared on Florence Street, which was approximately half a mile from campus. The 3 women were together in good mood as they drank wine and played board games. Haley was in great spirit as always, and everything was in order when the 3 decided to end the night and go to bed at around 2 a.m. However, the following morning, which was Thursday, March 8th, 2018, when Josephine and Michelle woke up from their sleep, they were shocked to discover that Haley had already left. However, the 2 were not worried because they thought maybe Haley had went to the library as she had usually did for the past few weeks since exams were approaching. They also thought that maybe she had gone to spend the day with Kevin, so she had to leave earlier. Unfortunately, Haley didn't return home that day, and the following night she was still missing. It was not usual for Haley to fail to return home unless when she was at Kevin's house, her friends Josephine and Michelle began getting worried. They sent her numerous messages, but she never replied any of them. Unfortunately, the following morning, Haley hadn't returned home, and she also hadn't replied to their text messages. So the two friends began calling Haley's friends and mutual friends. Unfortunately, no one had seen her or heard from her for the last 24 hours, so the friends, Josephine Arton and Michelle Sacco, activated the Find My Friend app on Michelle's iPhone to check where Haley was. The app immediately showed the location of Haley's phone. It was at 23 Oak Street, which was Orlando Tercero's address, so Michelle and Josephine decided to go immediately to Orlando's house to check on her there. Unfortunately, when they arrived at Orlando's house on Oak Street, there was no one, and so they had a bad feeling. They noticed that Orlando's car was not in the driveway, and when they knocked and rang the doorbell, there was no answer. Michelle then noticed that one of the ground floor windows in Orlando's house was partially open, so she went to that window and shouted inside. Unfortunately, she didn't get any response. The two decided to enter inside the house because it was clear that her phone might be inside, so they wanted to know if she must have forgotten her phone there and she was somewhere else. So with Josephine's help, Michelle managed to get inside the house through the window, and she also helped Josie get inside too. While inside, they discovered that the whole place was quiet, so they called out for Haley and Orlando, but there was no response. They decided to search the house, and that was when Michelle found herself in front of Orlando's closed bedroom door. So she opened the door and went inside. She saw Haley lying on her back in the bed with the blanket pulled up to his chin. She appeared to be sleeping, so she called out to her. Unfortunately, Haley never responded. Soon, Josephine also came in the room. Michelle moved closer to Haley, and she saw that she was pale. That was when she discovered that she was dead. They called 911, and shortly Binghamton police arrived at Oak Street, and they secured the scene using police tape. Haley Anderson's body was taken for an autopsy, and the medical examiner, Dr. James Terzian, determined that Haley was strangled to death using the necklace she was wearing. The examiner also found bruises on Haley's arms, which was an indication that someone must have grabbed her brutally. Back at the scene, the police questioned Josephine and Michelle as forensic team examined the hallway, right on the ceiling in front of the kitchen entrance. They discovered that there were several hooks into the wall with some kind of scarf attached to them, and it appeared as if someone had tried to hang himself or herself there. They also found a chair that was right below these hooks, and they took it as an evidence. In the kitchen, they found some packages of melatonin and Seroquel, which are sleep aid medications that can be purchased without a prescription at the pharmacy. In the room where Haley was found, the forensic team found a note which was written in Spanish, and it began with the phrase, "Lamento mucho esto," which meant, "I'm very sorry about all this." In the note, the writer confessed to doing something terrible, and he also addressed his late father by writing, "We'll see each other soon." The forensic team were able to confirm that the suicide note was written by Orlando Tercero and that he had killed Haley in his house. He then tried to take his own life by hanging himself with the help of the scarf and the hooks he had pierced into the wall. Orlando immediately became the prime suspect in the murder of Haley Anderson, but unfortunately they didn't find him inside the house. They also couldn't locate him anywhere. Police analyzed the recordings from various cameras located outside Orlando Tercero's house. In the footage, Orlando is seen leaving the house in the middle of the night from March 7th to 8th at 2:30 a.m. Police believed that he went to Haley, who was at home at that hour and was probably already in bed after the game night with her roommates, Josephine and Michelle. The police believed that Orlando managed to convince Haley to meet him despite the late hour, because just 45 minutes later, his house camera recorded him and Haley together walking up the driveway to the front door. They entered together, and this was the last time Haley was seen alive, Fortunately, Orlando was again filmed by his camera 7 hours later, at 9:45 a.m. the following day. He is seen throwing a garbage bag in his trash bin, then getting into his car and leaving. An hour later, new footage showed Orlando is back and he enters his house again. The footage shows him carrying a plastic bag. The police then discovered that Orlando was at a nearby pharmacy buying melatonin and Seroquel, which they believed that he most likely intended to take all of those sleeping pills at once and kill himself. In another recording, which was made in the early evening, the footage shows Orlando aborting his suicide mission. And so at 6:38 p.m., he is seen heading towards the basement from the side of the house. The investigators suspected that he got a hammer and the hooks from the basement, which he shortly fixed to the ceiling in front of his kitchen, intending to hang himself there. Fortunately, he didn't hang himself, and later they see him in the footage at 8:22 p.m. in front of his house. He drags the suitcase behind him as he walks down the street past the house and enters his car. He then drove away and disappeared from his camera's field of view. The police believed that the moment Orlando was fleeing away, Haley Anderson was already dead for several hours. They believed that Orlando attacked and killed her right after the two arrived at his house at 3:14 a.m. The police believed that he was heading to the airport so that he can leave the country. At that moment, two police officers went to Karen Anderson to inform her about her daughter's death. Later on, Orlando Tercero was seen at John Kennedy Airport terminal with a bag in one hand and his suitcase in the other. The police trailed him and found his car parked in one of the airport's parking lots. They discovered that he had dual citizenship that was American and Nicaraguan citizenship. They again found out that he had boarded a plane to Managua shortly after arriving at the airport, where he was picked up by his mother several hours later after landing. The following days, Orlando stayed at his parents' house in Chinandega, a city approximately 3 hours from the airport, in the northwest of the country. Stephen Cornwall, who was the district attorney, became very concerned when he discovered that Orlando had left the country because all the evidences found his house indicated that he was responsible for Haley Anderson's death. Investigators from Broome County Police Department immediately contacted authorities in Chinandega, Nicaragua, and some diplomatic relations were activated, and they transferred all the evidence they had collected to the authorities in Nicaragua. 4 days later, Orlando Tercero was arrested by the Nicaraguan police in Chinandega. However, the Nicaraguan authorities were not cooperating when it came to Orlando's extradition back to the U.S. On March 16, 2018, Orlando Tercero was charged with second-degree murder of Haley Anderson in New York State. Haley Anderson was later laid to rest at her home in Long Island. The funeral was attended by thousands of people. 2 months later, all her classmates graduated after their 5 years course was over. But painfully on the graduation day, Haley Anderson's chair at the graduation venue remained empty, only with her photo. In August 2019, Broome County investigators discovered that Nicaragua had decided not to extradite Orlando Tercero, who was now 23 years old, to the U.S., and they had decided to charge him for his crime in Nicaragua. They also agreed to allow the Broome County prosecution to participate in this trial in Chinandega through video. All evidence and proof collected in the U.S. against Orlando could be presented, and Haley's parents, her father Gordon and her mother Karen, were also given permission to participate in this trial in Nicaragua by video. In September 2019, the trial of Orlando Tercero began, and he was charged with femicide, which was punishable with up to 30 years imprisonment. In U.S., second-degree murder was punishable by up to 15 years imprisonment. The Broome County prosecution presented all the evidence and proof collected. Orlando killed Haley on the night of March 8, 2018, out of jealousy. He didn't want to accept that she didn't reciprocate his feelings, and had instead rekindled her relationship with Kevin. He knew he wouldn't see Haley much longer, as they were both about to graduate, and she would return to Long Island to begin her new phase of life after college. But he wanted her for himself. Witnesses like Haley's roommates, Josephine and Michelle, also testified and reported Orlando's invasive and possessive behaviors before the crime, and of course also how they found Haley in her home. Orlando's defense attorneys argued in this judicial process that their client was mentally incapable at the time of the crime, and the old blackout also came into play again. Also, in this case of Orlando Tercero, he allegedly couldn't remember absolutely anything after entering his house with Haley at 3:14 a.m. in the morning. He remembers entering with her, but after that, unfortunately, he had a blackout. However, it was determined that his blackout theory sounded incredibly implausible when considering what Orlando did after the crime. All the activities he did before and after the murder didn't seem like a blackout. Therefore, besides the claim that he was mentally incapable and the claim that he doesn't remember anything, there wasn't a single piece of evidence or indication of his blackout, and the judge also didn't accept his blackout theory. On November 1st, 2019, Orlando Tercero was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison.